When a seasoned sheriff walks into a crime scene, he's supposed to restore order, not orchestrate the chaos. But on one suffocating summer night in Houston, Texas, order died, and so did she. She was found face down in a shallow creek, gun still holstered, badge clipped to her belt, as if she died doing her duty. That's what they wanted you to believe. That it was a drug bust gone wrong, that her killer vanished into the city's shadows, that there were no warning signs. But they lied. Because the man who swore to serve and protect her was the same man who pulled the trigger. Over the next hour, we're going to rip through badge-polished lies, sealed-off case files, and the unspoken codes that silence whistleblowers inside the thin blue line. Because when Shell started asking the wrong questions about missing evidence, falsified reports, a string of suspects vanishing without a trace, he gave her the one answer he thought would shut her up forever. This is the story of a sheriff who believed his badge made him untouchable, of the woman who saw through the cracks, and of the justice that came far too late. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just murder. It's rot at the very heart of law enforcement. Houston's crime rate had been teetering, drug crews reshuffling turf, bodies surfacing in vacant lots, families buried in grief. And yet, if you asked the public who made them feel safe, you'd get one name again and again. Sheriff Bass Reeves, 52 years old, clean record, respected by peers, worshipped by politicians, father of 3 grown children. He coached Little League, sat front pew at Greater New Zion every Sunday. The man was considered bulletproof, both morally and professionally. He didn't just enforce law, he embodied it. But authority, like glass, gleams best before it cracks. Bass wasn't alone in casting that wide shadow. His right hand, his echo in every tense standoff, was Deputy Marion Brown, 34, born and raised in Spring, Texas. Top of her class at Quantico, she carried herself like someone who knew exactly how much space she took up in a room and didn't apologize for it. Her file was filled with commendations, her instincts were said to be surgical, and her loyalty to the badge, unshakable. The city saw them as invincible. The streets called them the twin flames of justice, power duo, crime-fighting soulmates. Whatever you named them, their results were undeniable. Murder charges that stuck, gangs disassembled without a whisper, drug busts so clean they made headlines in Dallas. But while the press printed praise, whispers clung to station hallways like mold behind drywall. Bass had his secrets, and Marion, despite the smiles and salutes, had begun to notice. She began logging inconsistencies in their cases, names that should have appeared in reports but didn't, arrests that happened too fast, confessions that came too easy. In texts, she hinted that something felt off, that Bass was changing, that he'd been disappearing during shift hours, that sometimes his case files had entries already typed before evidence was even collected. Her friends noticed she'd stopped sleeping, bags under her eyes, jitters in her hand, paranoia maybe. But then again, she was a cop. Paranoia is a survival trait in that uniform. What really got to her, though, wasn't the rumors on the street. It was the quiet ones inside the precinct. Officers who suddenly stopped talking when she entered a room. The ones who used to have lunch with her, now eating in their cars. And Bass, he was distant, sharper, watching her too long when she wasn't speaking. Still, she played the role. Saluted when expected, rode in his squad car, laughed at his jokes. But in private, she began to build something, a folder. She didn't trust the department's servers, so she kept it offline. Locked flash drives, password-protected backups. She dug into cold cases that had suspiciously gone warm overnight, examined warrants she never signed, compiled body cam footage with entire blocks of footage cut or glitched. She started calling former witnesses. Most didn't answer. The ones who did were nervous. One even hung up mid-sentence. In the photos from that time, Marion's smile was there, but it was different. Tight at the edges, her eyes didn't match. There's one selfie, taken from the passenger seat of a patrol car, where she's smiling, but her left hand is holding a USB drive between two fingers. She sent it to her cousin with a single caption, "Insurance." She knew what she was doing. She just didn't know someone was watching her do it. Someone had tapped her second phone line. Her apartment window screen had been removed and replaced, barely noticeable, unless you were looking. And Bass, he started to shift. He became more generous, more complimentary, brought her coffee, invited her to family barbecues. But Marion wasn't stupid. She saw it for what it was, calm before something far worse. In her final week on Earth, Marion changed her route to work 3 times. She started backing into parking spots. She stopped going to the gym and switched grocery stores. She even slept with a Glock on her nightstand, something she once swore she'd never do outside active duty. And every night before closing her blinds, she'd sit down at her kitchen table and write. The notes grew longer, more paranoid, but more precise. She wasn't unraveling. She was preparing. She was building her own case. A case against the man who trained her, trusted her, praised her in public, and if the whispers were true, had murdered to keep his secrets buried. She listed names, dates, license plates, bank account numbers, and right before the folder ended, on the last page of her notebook, scrawled in blue ink that trailed off halfway through the words, she wrote this. If something happens to me, start here. Bass isn't who they think he is. The footage is grainy. Midnight hour, a corner booth inside a 24-hour diner off Highway 288. Marion Brown sits alone, elbows on the table, a cup of coffee she never touches. Her fingers tremble against the rim, her eyes dart, first toward the door, then toward the window behind her, then to the waitress who walks by twice, too slow the second time. She's not eating, she's not relaxed, she's watching, bracing, listening for something, maybe someone that never appears. She reaches into her bag, pulls out her phone, dials a number, waits. No answer. She tries again. This time it connects. Her lips move fast, too fast for the surveillance mic to catch, but her face is pure unraveling, a woman trying not to fall apart in public. And then the tears. Not the kind that fall silently, these are the kind you fight. Jaw clenched, hands shaking, shoulders tight. The kind of crying that comes from knowing something terrible is already in motion and you can't stop it. She leaves a message, a voicemail, 7 words that would echo long after her body was found. If something happens to me, look into Bass's old homicide files. Click. That voicemail would be the last time anyone heard her voice alive. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that someone was already listening. And they weren't just tracking her, they were waiting for her to stop running. Bass Reeves wore 2 uniforms. One was stitched by the county, crisp, authoritative, gleaming with medals. The other was invisible. Woven of shadows, silence, and secrets buried in badge reports. To the city, he was a hero. To a few women behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. Marion's private file, now thicker than a case binder, had started out as quiet curiosity, a hunch, a whisper of something off in a homicide report, a victim's name she'd heard Bass mention far too casually. But then came another name, a different case, same inconsistencies. 3 women, all dead, all unsolved, all supposedly random. All of them had either slept with, informed for, or had been in contact with Sheriff Reeves. None of that was in the official files. The more Marion read, the less she slept. Witness interviews were missing. Lab results marked inconclusive that had at one point been listed as positive. Photos of bruises cropped to hide fingerprints. And worst of all, internal case notes redacted in ink so heavy it bled through 4 pages. It was no longer a hunch. It was a pattern. One of the women, Latasha Wills, was found in her bathtub in 2021. Initial ruling, accidental fall. But in a backup server, Marion accessed an early draft of the coroner's report noted defensive wounds, strangulation marks. That line disappeared in the final version. The second victim, Carla Jean, was reported as a drug overdose, fentanyl again. But Marion found surveillance footage, never filed in evidence, of her meeting Bass in a parking garage 2 nights prior. They argued. She cried. He slammed the car door and drove off. 3 weeks later, dead. The third woman was an informant, street level, nervous, texted Marion once. He said, I'd disappear if I opened my mouth. She disappeared. No body, no closure, just gone. And then something worse, an internal file, opened quietly against Marion. The complaint, anonymous, claimed she was compromising cases, obsessed, unstable. Attached were doctored screenshots of emails she never wrote, claims she had threatened witnesses, that she'd tried to seduce fellow officers. Marion knew exactly who filed it. The system turned its gaze from him and toward her. In her final arrest, 3 weeks before her death, her body cam glitched out midway. Corrupted file, no recovery. It was the same day she'd told a colleague she had something explosive. She never got the chance to show it, because 3 days later she was gone, found alone in her apartment, face pale, eyes open. The scene was neat, too neat. Pill bottle tipped over on the floor. One line in the police report said, suspected overdose, probable suicide. But there was no note, no history of depression, and Marion had called her sister just 2 hours earlier, excited about a vacation they were planning, laughing, making plans for next month. Her family didn't believe it for a second. Neither did the forensic pathologist hired privately by her mother. The autopsy revealed something the police report didn't mention: a small fracture in her hyoid bone, bruising on the inner neck, strangulation. The fentanyl? Injected post-mortem. A staged scene, a planted overdose. And the man standing behind the podium at her memorial, speaking softly to the crowd, quoting scripture, and talking about her unwavering courage, was Bass Reeves. His voice didn't crack, his hands didn't shake, his eyes didn't wander. He delivered his eulogy like he was reciting a shopping list. And in the front row, Marion's mother watched him the entire time. Not a tear fell from her eyes, just a stare, fixed, cold, knowing. She knew exactly who killed her daughter, and she knew he was standing in plain sight. In the quiet moments between evidence and implication, between fact and fear, we're left with something far heavier than silence. A woman is dead. Her case was closed before the ink dried, and the man who may have orchestrated it all walks free, decorated, untouchable. But here's the truth. Stories like this don't get buried by bullets. They get buried by forgetfulness, by a system counting on your silence, by people too tired, too distracted, or too scared to care. So if you're still watching, you're already part of something bigger. If this story has gripped you, unsettled you, forced you to question what lies behind polished badges and folded flags, do something small that echoes loud. Hit the like button. It's not just for clicks. It signals the algorithm to keep these shadows lit. And drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. City, state, country, it doesn't matter. Because the more voices attached to Marion's name, the harder it becomes to erase her. She didn't get justice, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she can still get remembered. In the chaos left behind, weeks passed, then months. The city moved on as it always does. Headlines faded. Marion's name, once spoken with hesitation in hushed corners of the department, now lingered only in the mouths of her grieving family. Her apartment was cleaned out, her desk cleared, her badge retired with no fanfare. But not everyone forgot. Not the rookie. Officer Julian Vega was 36, fresh out of academy, idealistic. Still believed in good and evil, still thought justice wore a uniform. He never worked under Marion directly, but he'd heard the whispers, the ones that never made the press. And one evening, while helping clear archived case files, he found it. Unmarked, misfiled, nearly shredded. Marion's private dossier. A box of names, photos, scribbled notes, printouts of homicide reports that didn't match up. 3 of them stamped closed by Bass himself. He took a risk. He took the whole thing home. 2 nights later, an anonymous envelope arrived at the FBI field office in Houston. No return address, just a USB drive. Inside, photographs. Screenshots of texts between Marion and Bass. Deleted emails retrieved from a backup cache. GPS timestamps. Surveillance footage she wasn't supposed to have. There was even a recorded voice memo, Marion's voice, quiet but certain. If you're hearing this, I didn't leave. I was taken out. The Bureau launched an internal task force within 24 hours. Quiet, surgical. They didn't want another scandal exploding before they had him nailed. And then, just after dawn on a quiet Saturday, Sheriff Bass Reeves, Houston's golden badge, father of 3, trusted face of crime reform, was pulled out of a small fishing boat at Lake Livingston. His youngest son watched as agents read the warrant. No one fought. Bass barely blinked. But behind that calm, a man who knew the dam had finally cracked. News vans swarmed the courthouse by noon. His mugshot hit the internet by dinner. What followed wasn't a trial, it was an earthquake. 5 women, each found dead between 2015 and 2023. Each woman had a direct or personal link to Bass. One was a known informant. One was a domestic violence victim under his protection. 2 were dismissed as suicides. 1 was Marion. The jury sat through days of testimony, coroners, forensic analysts, whistleblowers, grieving relatives, but nothing landed heavier than the moment Julian Vega took the stand. He opened Marion's file on the projector. Page by page, he walked them through what she discovered. Time discrepancies, falsified witness logs, staged crime scenes, and then came the gut punch. A photo. Marion, smiling, sitting beside Bass. The 2 of them off duty. It wasn't just a partnership, it was an affair. She trusted him, she believed in him, and when she began to ask questions, she became his threat. The final testimony came from an FBI forensic tech. The USB drive, untraceable in its origin, contained one final file. A voice note, Bass's voice, talking to someone else, low, angry. She's getting too close. If she talks, everything falls. You think I built all this to let it crash because of her? He never admitted it in court, never confessed, but the jury didn't need a confession. They delivered a verdict in under 4 hours, guilty. On 5 counts of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. Bass Reeves will spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Marion, she got no second chance. No day in court, no final breath to speak her truth. Only a city learning far too late that its most trusted man was the monster hiding in plain sight. And in those final moments of the documentary footage, as her family stood outside the courthouse, holding her photo, not a badge, not a file folder, just her face, her sister whispered to the cameras. She told me once, if I disappear, don't let them turn me into a rumor. They didn't, because someone listened and someone finally spoke. The night air in Houston was thick with candle smoke. They came quietly, neighbors, officers, former classmates, strangers who had only seen her face on the news. They held candles that flickered like the pieces of a woman's life they were all still trying to understand. Some wore black, others brought white roses. And as the wind swept through the vigil, Marion's sister stood before the crowd, holding a framed photograph, not of a victim, but of a fighter, one who tried to warn the world before it was too late. She didn't speak from a stage, no microphone, just her voice. She wasn't perfect, her sister said, but she was brave, and they made her pay for that. People cried, grown men with badges removed their hats. A young girl, no older than 7, clutched a handwritten sign, Justice for Marion. And in that moment, one truth became clear. This case wasn't just about corruption. It wasn't just about a decorated sheriff with blood on his hands. It was about how power, when left unchallenged, turns rot into routine. It's about the silence that follows when a woman raises her voice against giants in uniform. But Marion Brown refused to vanish quietly. Her notes, her files, her voice, they outlived the man who tried to erase them. So if this story settled into your chest, if it stayed with you longer than the runtime of this video, do something, speak her name, drop a comment below and type the words, Justice for Marion, not because hashtags fix everything, but because memory matters. Because when enough people echo a single name over and over, it becomes impossible to bury it. And if you believe stories like Marion's deserve more than a footnote, subscribe. Not for views, not for vanity, but because truth is often hidden behind the badges we're told to trust. And it takes all of us to bring it into the light. This story is over, but the echo of her warning isn't. Justice, not yet. Justice for Marion, always.